It all began on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the lake looked like glass and the world finally felt calm for once, until the HOA decided to remind me who they thought was in charge. I was standing at the end of the dock behind my rental property, tossing my heavy-duty magnet into the water like I'd done 100 times before. Magnet fishing had become my favorite weekend hobby, part treasure hunt, part cleanup, part therapy. I'd pulled up everything from rusted fishing lures to a literal antique revolver once. It wasn't loud, it wasn't messy, and it actually helped keep the lake cleaner. But apparently, the HOA didn't agree. I'd barely reeled in my second toss when a golf cart screeched to a halt at the edge of the private shoreline. 3 board members hopped out like they were storming Normandy, clipboards in hand, sunglasses hiding whatever humanity they once had. One of them, Janice, the self-declared president, shouted across the water like I was committing a felony. Magnet fishing is not allowed in this community. You're in violation of Section 12.4 of the Lakeside Behavior Ordinance. I stared at her, confused. That wasn't in any rules I'd been shown when I signed my lease. I calmly told her that this was a public access lake, and I was doing nothing illegal. She disagreed. Strongly. This lake is overseen by the HOA, she snapped. And your actions are considered disruptive and dangerous. I asked her what, exactly, was dangerous about pulling up junk metal. She said I could damage the lake bed, like I was dragging an anchor the size of a car engine. I should have let it go, but something about the smug way she wrote my name on her clipboard made my blood boil. 2 days later, I got the notice. $500 fine for unauthorized aquatic activity. I called the office and demanded clarification, but all I got was a voicemail telling me to refer to community standards. The thing is, I'd already read the rules. 3 times. Magnet fishing wasn't mentioned anywhere. I even had emails from the property manager saying it was fine. I submitted an appeal with all my documentation, thinking it would be resolved like reasonable adults. Instead, they doubled the fine. Now it was $1,000, and they said I was escalating behavior by continuing to fish during the appeal process. That's when I knew it wasn't about fishing. It was about control. They didn't like that I'd pushed back. So they decided to make an example out of me. What they didn't know, what Janice definitely didn't know, was that I wasn't just some bored weekend fisherman. I was a quiet real estate developer who specialized in distressed property acquisitions. And I'd already been eyeing several parcels of land around this lake. I hadn't planned on buying them. But after that fine? Oh, I started planning real fast. They wanted a fight over water rights. Fine. I was going to hit them where it hurt. Not with another appeal. Not with petty letters. I was going to take the lake, and everything they thought they owned, with it. The moment I decided to buy the lake, everything shifted from hobby to mission. I started with research, quietly pulling county records, property plats, and public water usage agreements from the local registrar's office. What I found was shocking. The HOA didn't own the lake. They only leased recreational rights from a series of private landowners who collectively bordered the water. The lake itself was technically a man-made retention body formed from merged quarry pits decades ago, and the surrounding land was fractured across multiple parcels, some of which were for sale. The kicker: the HOA didn't even own their lease outright. It was tied to an expiring easement with automatic renewal clauses, unless a new adjacent property owner objected. That's all I needed. I made a few calls to brokers I'd worked with before, setting up quiet bids under a shell company I controlled. Within 2 weeks, I had offers on 3 of the 6 privately owned parcels that touched the lake's edge. Each one came with partial lake access and, more importantly, legal input into recreational usage. The HOA had no idea. I kept magnet fishing as usual, even threw in some exaggerated treasure hunt posts on local forums to draw attention, just to make them squirm. Janice doubled down. Another fine showed up, this time $1,500 with a warning that further violations would result in legal proceedings. I smiled reading it. Because by then, I'd already closed on my first parcel. It came with 80 feet of shoreline, a boat launch, and partial voting rights on any shared lake usage agreements. Suddenly, I wasn't just some guy with a magnet, I was a co-owner of the water they were trying to control. But I didn't stop there. Over the next month, I snagged 2 more parcels, one from a disinterested retiree, another from a family desperate to offload their lakeside tax burden. I paid slightly above market to ensure they didn't ask questions. And just like that, I controlled over 40% of the lake's bordering properties. Enough to dispute the HOA's lease, revoke their access, and force them into arbitration. But I wasn't ready to play that card just yet. No, I wanted them to dig their own hole a little deeper first. I kept fishing. I even invited a few friends from my salvage club to join me for a public weekend cleanup event. We wore matching Lake Squad shirts and pulled out old car batteries, bike frames, and more scrap than I expected. Janice showed up mid-event and tried to shut us down in front of a local news camera. Huge mistake. The story aired that night, local hobbyists fined for cleaning lake. Public sentiment shifted fast. Online forums lit up with angry comments. The HOA's phone lines were jammed for days. Behind the scenes, I filed my formal objection to the lease renewal and submitted a certified request to revoke the HOA's recreational access due to misuse, harassment, and community disruption. They didn't see it coming. They thought I was just poking the bear. But I was already draining their moat, and soon, I'd be the one holding the keys to their precious water. Once my objection to the lease renewal hit the county clerk's desk, it set off a chain reaction the HOA never anticipated. Suddenly, they were no longer just dealing with a supposedly disruptive fisherman. They were facing a property owner with legal standing, documentation, and a lot more money than they had. I received a terse email from the HOA's legal counsel demanding a meeting to discuss land use clarification. I agreed, but not before I hired my own attorney, one who specialized in HOA litigation and property law. When we walked into the conference room, Janice and two board members looked visibly rattled. They expected some amateur in jeans and a tackle box. Instead, they got a calm, confident man in a tailored suit with a full legal brief in hand. I listened patiently as they tried to explain their community-first policies and how my actions were creating division. My lawyer responded by sliding over a notarized packet showing our ownership of 43% of the lakefront, including supporting environmental documentation of our cleanup efforts. Then came the bombshell. We were officially revoking the HOA's access. Effective immediately, any HOA member found on our sections of the lake would be trespassing. Their lease, tied to unanimous border consent, was now invalid. They could no longer host events, patrol the docks, or issue citations. Janice's mouth actually dropped open. She tried to argue, but my lawyer politely explained that any further enforcement would result in a lawsuit for harassment, slander, and unlawful fines. When the meeting ended, they walked out looking like someone had drained their power with a magnet. I returned to the lake that evening, tossing my magnet off the dock just for the symbolism. The silence was delicious. No HOA patrols. No clipboards. Just the sound of the line slicing through the water. Over the next few weeks, I posted a public notice informing all residents of the revoked access and explaining their rights to petition the board if they felt misled. I didn't threaten, I just laid out the facts. And that's when the floodgates really opened. Residents started asking questions. Why were they never told the HOA didn't actually own the lake? Why were they fined over water rights they didn't understand? Some even formed an informal coalition demanding transparency. Meanwhile, I began developing the 3 parcels I bought, not with buildings, but with small community spaces. A picnic table here, a fire pit there. I opened my portion of the lake to the public for free use, with one condition: no HOA personnel allowed. If they were spotted, they'd be escorted off by private security I'd contracted. I hung signs at every access point: welcome to the lake, unless you're HOA. It became the new neighborhood joke. People started calling the area free water, and kids wore t-shirts that read banned by the HOA club. Even local news outlets followed up on the original story, reporting how a minor dispute over magnet fishing had spiraled into full-blown community rebellion. Janice tried one last desperate move, petitioning the city to declare the lake a regulated waterway under HOA oversight. But the city laughed it off. They didn't want anything to do with the mess she'd created. And so the board, once feared, now looked more like lost tourists peering in from the edges of a lake they no longer ruled. I hadn't just fished in their water, I'd taken it. With the HOA officially banned from the lake and their lease power dissolved, you'd think the story would end there, but no. They couldn't let it go. The board, now fractured and humiliated, started to lash out in every direction they could. First came the letters. Passive-aggressive mailers slipped into everyone's mailbox warning about unsanctioned lake usage and dangerous individuals encouraging civil disobedience. The dangerous individual was me, of course. Then came the anonymous complaints. Code enforcement was called out for imaginary zoning issues on my parcels. One agent arrived to investigate a large-scale illegal excavation, only to find a small fire pit surrounded by lawn chairs. Another complaint accused me of hosting unauthorized public events, which turned out to be 3 kids skipping rocks. None of it stuck. I documented everything and forwarded it to my attorney, who began compiling a harassment case. Meanwhile, I expanded my efforts. I reached out to 2 other property owners still holding lakefront plots and made them offers. One flatly refused. He was a long-time resident, deeply loyal to the original HOA. The other, however, was very interested. He'd been fined $200 the previous year for having a wind chime that was audibly disruptive during quiet hours. Within 2 weeks, he'd sold me his share. With that, I crossed the 50% mark. I now had majority shoreline control and full authority to dispute any future agreements, lease renewals, or HOA interference. Janice tried to rally a counter-movement, calling for an emergency vote to censure my anti-community behavior. It backfired. Only 11 people showed up, and half of them walked out halfway through. By now, the rest of the neighborhood was enjoying lake access like never before. No permits, no fines, no ridiculous paperwork. Families fished off the dock, teens kayaked freely, and elderly residents sat along the shore without fear of being cited for improper seating equipment. And the best part? Every time someone cast a line or pulled up a piece of scrap metal, they'd smile and say, "Doing my part." The HOA's desperate final move was a lawsuit claiming I was interfering with community harmony. My lawyer laughed when he read it. The judge threw it out almost immediately, citing my documented property rights and extensive evidence of harassment from the HOA. When the verdict hit, it was the final nail in their legal coffin. We celebrated with a community fish fry at the lake, using fish caught that morning and serving it on the land they once tried to keep me off of. Janice and the last remaining board members didn't show up. They couldn't. They'd become pariahs in their own neighborhood. I stood by the fire, handing out plates, while Max, the retired retriever from my last fight with an HOA, laid by my side, tail wagging in rhythm with the laughter around us. For the first time in years, the lake belonged to the people who actually lived there. No clipboards. No golf carts. Just families, stories, and a peaceful body of water reflecting freedom back at them. What started as a petty fine had become a complete reset of power. And I wasn't done yet. If they thought banning me from fishing would shut me down, they hadn't learned a thing. Owning the majority of the lakefront wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was strategic leverage, and I intended to use it. With the HOA's influence reduced to bitter whispers and hollow rules no one respected, I shifted focus to long-term change. The first thing I did was establish the Lakeside Community Trust, a non-profit that would manage my parcels and preserve them as public-use green space, free from any HOA interference forever. I structured it so residents could participate in its oversight, with rotating volunteers and open meetings. Transparency, the very thing the HOA had always feared. We started holding weekend cleanup events, kayak lessons for kids, and nature walks led by local teachers. Word spread fast, and attendance grew with every week. Residents who had been too scared to speak up before now stopped me on the street to say thanks, some even bringing homemade cookies or dropping off fishing gear they no longer used. But while the community came together, the HOA unraveled. 2 more board members resigned within a month, citing community hostility and lack of enforcement ability. Translation: nobody was listening to them anymore. And without the lake to lord over, their authority shrank to a few overgrown flower beds and a fading set of pool rules. Then came the vote. After months of pressure, the community called a special election to restructure the HOA entirely. For the first time, candidates were nominated from every corner of the neighborhood, not just Janice's clique. I watched the meeting from the back of the room, arms folded, as resident after resident took the mic to describe years of petty fines, targeted bullying, and silence when they asked for help. The final vote wasn't even close. Every old guard member was voted out, and a brand new board was sworn in with a clear mission: restore trust and never forget how power had been abused. I didn't run for a seat. I didn't need one. My role was never to rule. It was to remind. To make sure no one ever forgot what it looked like when authority crossed the line. And the lake, now free of its iron grip, became living proof of what happens when you stand your ground. Meanwhile, I expanded the Trust's mission, buying up a few adjacent parcels and connecting trails so that kids could walk from one end of the lake to the other without crossing a single road. We put up benches with dedication plaques to long-time residents, installed free tackle boxes and bait stations, and even added a dog-friendly dock in honor of Maximum. The place transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. What used to be a space ruled by rules became a place led by people. And it didn't go unnoticed. The local paper ran a story headlined, "From Fines to Freedom, One Man's Fight to Reclaim the Lake." I kept a copy on my wall. And every now and then, I'd glance at it and smile, not because I won, but because they lost to their own arrogance. The HOA's mistake wasn't fining me. It was underestimating what I'd do next. They thought I was just a guy with a magnet. They didn't realize I was about to become their biggest liability. And the lake. It was just the beginning. Months after the HOA's fall, the lake had become a symbol not just of freedom, but of how a single act of defiance could ripple out and drown an entire system of fear. What started with one magnet and one fine had turned into a full-blown community revival. And I wasn't done building. With the Trust thriving and the new HOA board keeping their promises of fairness and transparency, I shifted my focus to the long game, protecting the lake for future generations. I hired environmental consultants to test the water, assess the local ecosystem, and help restore natural balance to areas damaged by decades of mismanagement. Turns out, all that magnet fishing had only scratched the surface. Beneath the water was a graveyard of junk, dumped appliances, and corroded scrap from old construction. I funded a full-scale cleanup operation, hiring divers, renting barges, and bringing in volunteers who turned out in droves. Over the next 3 months, we removed over 4 tons of waste. 4 tons. The lake sparkled by the end, clearer and deeper than anyone remembered. The kids started swimming again. Elderly residents took out their long-forgotten canoes. The whole place felt reborn. I added solar-powered lights along the main dock, motion sensor trail lamps, and a community message board that quickly filled with thank you notes, hand-drawn fish, and one truly impressive crayon portrait of me holding a magnet like a sword. We even hosted a community Lake Day festival, with booths, live music, and a massive fish fry, all free, all open to anyone except former board members who tried to crash it and were politely turned away. No hard feelings. Okay, maybe a few. But the point had been made, and not just locally. My story got picked up by a regional magazine and even a small documentary crew who filmed a short segment on how a man bought a lake to fight the HOA. It went viral. Emails poured in from across the country, people trapped in neighborhoods ruled by similar boards, asking for advice, asking how I did it, asking if they could do it too. My answer was simple: start small, document everything, and never underestimate how quickly control crumbles when someone challenges it with truth and persistence. I created an online guide, sharing all the legal steps I'd taken, the research templates, the lease laws most people overlook. I called it Reclaim the Water, and within weeks, it had thousands of downloads. Max passed away during this time, peacefully, surrounded by people who loved him. We buried him near the lake with a small plaque that reads, "Good boy. Better legacy." Every time I see a kid toss a line into the water or an old neighbor resting on the dock, I think about how it all started. One fine. One magnet. One refusal to back down. The HOA had tried to make an example out of me. Instead, I became a blueprint for how to beat them. And as long as that lake stays free, Max's bark and my fight will echo across every ripple.